sure hope that I'll be back here to speak because I didn't know last Sunday if I'd be in jail this week or I'd be here to speak. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about, my alcoholism and the progression of it, and then I'll speak a little bit about the legal consequences I've had and the medical consequences, and then also I'll touch on the on my recovery and what's led me to this point. So basically, I think the first time I had a drink, I was about 17 years old. I remember I was out in a paddle boat with Max. We used to live on a lake, and I was out there, and we caught some Mad Dog 2020 somehow, and we were out there drinking that, and I don't know why, but I thought that stuff tasted good at the time, but I know I got thoroughly intoxicated that night, and apparently I liked the effect of it because I continued to drink throughout my 20s, 30s, and into my 40s. And at first I started drinking, and I felt like, wow, this is like, I really liked the effects to the point where, because I went to parties and I hung out with kind of like the party crowd in high school, and I'd go to the keg parties, and everyone thought I was a funny drunk, and I think I was a little bit more social and a little more charismatic or something when I drank. So I thought it kind of helped me. So I used alcohol as a teenager, and I think, like a lot of people do, but I didn't, I wasn't physically dependent on it at that time or whatever. I just kind of partied and stuff and hung out with kind of like the party crowd. But then, into my 20s, I began to use alcohol a little bit more. I still didn't have any physical dependency on it or anything, but I would use it, on the weekend. I'd drink on the weekend, or if, we went out with friends or whatever, I'd use it socially. And then, I'd use it a little bit to relax at night and, grill some steaks. And I liked wine at the time, and I drank wine, different kinds of wines and this and that. But, it still wasn't a real issue. There was some times where I actually got married in my 20s, and I remember there was a few times where my wife had to pick me up from some parties where I was out drinking and got inebriated and probably smoked some weed and stuff and couldn't drive home, and she had to come pick me up. And then there was a couple times where I went, with some friends to a strip club, stuff like that. But drinking wasn't something I did during the week or during the day or anything like that. It was more of a social thing, or sometimes to relax a little bit. But then, later into my 20s, I started using it a little more. I ended up getting divorced later in my 20s, and after that, I started using it a little bit more to cope. My life kind of, after I got divorced, I feel like my life sort of got off track. I mean, it was quite unstable. I had issues getting and holding good jobs, and I was always having housing issues, and I was moving a lot, and I just was dealing with a lot of stress. I had sold a business, which I actually, I had a business and it did very well, and I sold it. And after I sold the business, I didn't really have a goal in life. I didn't know what I was doing. So it felt like kind of just unstable. I felt really unstable. And I think I started getting into depression, and I started using alcohol more to cope with life's challenges during that time, going into my 30s. Started kind of using alcohol, as a social thing, but as well then started to use it to more cope with my stress. I was dealing with a lot of stress. And I do remember, probably somewhere in my early 30s, I remember it was kind of a wake-up call for me, because I remember I was drinking during the day, and I thought to myself, oh, this is where you are now. Now you're drinking during the day, like day drinking. I I never did that before. Maybe on the weekends or something, but it would never be, during the week. And so this is when I had my business, and I was actually drinking in my office. And it was kind of a wake-up call for me. I thought, yeah, okay, this is where you are now. But that didn't really stop me. Life kept going, and challenges kept happening. And I ended up, after my divorce, I ended up going out one night to the downtown and partying for a while and driving home. And when I was driving home, I ended up getting pulled over and got a DUI and got thrown in jail. And that was my first legal consequence. That was like in 2012, I believe that was in 2012. And when I got thrown in jail, it seemed like for me, legal consequences, they were almost like magnetic effect or something. Like once you get one, then you get a bunch of them, like fly a moth to a flame or something. Because I ended up getting arrested about a half a dozen times over the next few years, and every time it was related to alcohol. It would be public intoxication or just crazy stuff that always related to alcohol. And so the legal consequences mounted, and the fees and costs were exuberant. So I ended up dealing with that. Those consequences kind of like through my 30s, like they were, they plagued me. But then, it seemed like I was just kind of like striking out in life in a way. I didn't really have real stability. I'd moved around a lot, kept changing jobs and everything, and jobs weren't working out for me. I mean, I lived up in North Carolina. I lived in like 3 different cities there, like in Raleigh and Charlotte and Asheville. And then I ended up having a job where I traveled a lot. And I was basically a traveling project manager, so I basically lived in a hotel. We did projects all over the country. And I'd be, during that time, I think my alcoholism it started getting worse because I was always alone. And I switched to basically drinking vodka. I didn't drink anything else but vodka. And I remember just sitting there. I'd get off work. I worked a lot, but I would go and, I might have a drink with dinner, and then I'd go home to my hotel room, and I would basically drink and watch TV. And it was pretty lonely. I just kind of like drank by myself. And I started getting to the point where I was embarrassed of how much I drank, because I realized I'd probably drank about a shit of vodka a day, and I was embarrassed to have the cleaners come in the next day and see these vodka bottles every day. And so I started running the vodka bottles out to the dumpster because I didn't want the cleaners to see how big of a problem it was. And truly, I was probably just hiding that from myself, that I was drinking as much as I really was. Truly, I was probably just hiding that from myself, that I was drinking as much as I really was. But I mean, as far as like times, like there's so many things that I could probably go into, just times when I was drinking by myself. I mean, I remember one time I woke up in downtown Charlotte on the bank steps. I had blacked out, and I have no idea how I even got there. I was sitting on the Bank of America porch steps, and to this day, I have no idea even how I got there. So there's just like multiple times, many times that I, was out drinking by myself, and it was dangerous. There's consequences like that. But so I basically, through that bad job, I feel like I started increasing my alcohol. I was dealing with depression, using the alcohol to cope with depression. And then there was a lot of actually other things that I can go into, but I don't really need to go into. But I had some financial stuff that happened, and it caused a lot of depression from there. It caused a lot of anxiety, and I think I also dealt with dealing with that. I dealt with that with alcohol as well. That's how I coped. And any challenge that came my way, I was coping with vodka. So then, what I did is I ended up meeting a girlfriend in Asheville, and we lived together in Asheville, and that relationship was started out good, but in one sense it didn't, is it was pretty toxic because we really were both kind of like alcoholics, on the verge of being alcoholics. And then when we got together, it was almost like we fed on each other. We fueled it. And it was like we fueled each other's alcoholism, and we kind of like became alcoholics together. It was like we were together in like the end of 2019 into 2020 when COVID hit, and our alcoholism kind of like skyrocketed during that time. We basically started becoming dependent on alcohol. I drank vodka, she drank wine, but we both drank way too much of it, and became dependent to the point where we had physical dependencies. We started shaking. We'd wake up in the morning, we'd have withdrawals. Like I would sweat and I would shake, and she would shake violently. And she felt like she was going to die. I remember it felt like every morning she asked me to go to the store for her, as soon as the store would sell wine at 7 a.m. So I'd have to run out before work, get her some wine so she could feel normal. I mean, so that's kind of like, we lived like that for a year and a half, or at least, like, where it was like every single day we had to go out and get alcohol just to be normal. And she had a remote job at the time, so she drank during work and everything, and she had actually a really high-end job. Like, she was a doctor, but she was able to do it remotely. But so I would go to the office, but I would, and I would have alcohol shakes and stuff. I remember there was a time when, I'm at work, and people would noticeably, they would see that I was shaking, So there was times where I had to run home at lunch and get a shot of vodka to feel normal. But I mean, during that time I had like, a real dependency, to the point where every single day after work, I would only try to keep as much alcohol in the house. The truth is, we couldn't keep any alcohol in the house because we would drink it all. So, like, there was never any alcohol in the house, because everything we ever bought, regardless how much, it would be done that night. So that's why we always had to go out in the morning. But I would basically end up, I was drinking about a fifth vodka a day. I would go out and I would buy like a pint. Because this is another, like, why? I want to pretend that really that's all I drink is a pint. But the truth is that I ended up drinking that, and then I had to go back out. And I went out to the liquor stores so often that I had a little row around Asheville. Like, I didn't like to go to the same liquor store at the same time, because I was in same day or whatever. So I was embarrassed that they would see how much alcohol I was really drinking. So I would like literally drive way out of my way to get the liquor from a different store, so that they didn't, know that I was a raging alcoholic. Obviously, they already knew that, but that was pretty much my life. It was like I was literally dependent on alcohol at that point. My job situation was it was good at the time, but I got into an argument with my boss at the time on text message around the time of COVID, and I was drinking, and I ended up texting my boss, "Fuck you," and I got fired. So, that job went away, and, then I remember realizing, wow, that was the stupidest text message I ever sent. And I tried to get my job back, and my boss even said, it's, because I tried to actually go and apologize, but she's like, Josh, you need to get a hold of your alcohol problem. She knew that I already, she knew that I had an alcohol problem. She knew that I was probably drunk when I texted her that. So anyway, I ended up not getting, I got a different job after a while. But during this other job, or during this time, me and Gillian, and it was my girlfriend, we basically, we were realizing, we did have an alcohol issue. Obviously, we were shaking and we felt like we were going to die in the morning. I mean, we were drinking every day. It was obviously an issue, and we tried to kind of like get sober by ourselves. We would take and limit our drinking. We would take a magic marker and say, draw a line on the vodka bottle and say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but it never worked. We drank the whole thing anyway, So, but then there was times where Jillian would go home to Tennessee to her mother's house, try to get sober and dry out. I would stay back in Nashville and try to dry out, maybe for a month or so. And, it might work for a couple weeks or a month or whatever, but as soon as Jillian got back, we'd end up going back to drinking every time. But then what happened is around 2022 in January or February, I was dealing with, I had a vehicle that wouldn't start. It was really cold at that time, I remember, and I had to call AAA. It was the AAA was out at the house, and I was talking to the AAA guy, and then next thing I know, I'm in the house, my sister's there, and the paramedics are there, and I hear, he just had a massive seizure. They're asking me the president, who's the president, what's my name, my address, my social, a lot on the world. They were asking me, but I remember feeling very weird and dizzy. I never had a seizure in my life. It was very strange feeling. And so I had a seizure. I had ended up falling flat on my face into the bark mulch outside, bit a hole through my tongue. They brought me to the hospital. I ended up, getting the brain scans and doing everything that they needed to do for a seizure, and got out of there. They had me on like benzos and stuff to get off of alcohol. I think after that I was maybe off of alcohol for about a month or so, and I went back into it. And then in August of 2022, I was driving down the highway, working, and I was doing a project management job at this time, and I had a cabinet in the back of my truck, and I was about to pull out, and some guy was driving beside me, and he started pointing in the back of the truck, pull over, that thing's about to fall out. So I pulled over, and I was going to secure the load, and the next thing I know, I wake up in the passenger seat, there's blood all over my truck, and the paramedics are asking me who the president is, what's my name, and I realized I had another seizure, and they brought me to the hospital. Bit a hole through my tongue again. And I had a seizure just like literally on the side of the highway, like 2 minutes earlier. A minute earlier, I was driving down the highway, 80 miles an hour. So that was a huge blessing that I pulled over and was trying to secure the load. But because I could have been dead. I could have been dead. You killed someone else. But anyway, then I went to the hospital, and at the time I didn't want anyone to even know that I had a seizure. I didn't call any of my family or anything. I just went through the whole procedure, and then I told the doctor I needed to leave, and he said, well, this would be against my orders, or, against doctor's orders to leave, but I did anyway. I ended up leaving, got an Uber with my paper hospital shirt on, went back to the truck, jumped in the truck, took it back home, and I was on the back porch, and the neighbor girl heard me yell, help. And when I yelled help, they said they came over, and I hit the deck. I had another massive seizure right there on the back porch. I was seizing up. They called 911. The next thing I remember is I'm in the hospital. Same situation. I had another seizure that same day. And my mom's husband came up, my sister came up, and yeah, I remember they were stitching my hand up, and I remember the doctor asking me how much I drank, and I tried to say like a couple of beers, and he was like, "Come on, get real. Wait, seriously, what do you really drink?" And he was trying to get it out of me, like, obviously you're an alcoholic. You got a problem. But I was still at the point where I wasn't even willing to admit it. I was like trying to pretend I only drank a few beers here and there. And I drank about a fifth of vodka a day. And so, anyway, I ended up getting out of that hospital, and fast forward a little bit to the December of 22. We were out in Utah, and we were having Christmas out there and staying with the family and everything. And I was out snowboarding with my boys. I was coming down the mountain, and I kind of blanked out. And then I felt kind of strange, and I went into the bathroom after in the lodge. And I noticed my lip was bleeding, or my tongue was bleeding, but I didn't remember falling. I didn't fall or anything, so I was confused, and I felt really confused. So I started getting nervous because I felt like maybe I had a little mini seizure or something. And so anyway, I wasn't drinking because I was with my boys, and they had asked me, "Dad, don't drink because it makes us nervous, we get very uncomfortable with you drinking." So I was trying not to, but I also was worried about seizures. So I ended up having to run to the liquor store on the way home from the mountain, and I grabbed myself a vodka, which I didn't drink until I was going to have a drink when I went to the house so that I could not have a seizure. Well, I didn't have a drink yet, but I was telling my dad and everybody in the family about our snowboard day, and I was going through talking to them, and I had a bottle of water in my hand, and my dad said I started shaking it all over the place. He thought I was joking, messing around, and I ended up hitting the deck, hitting the floor. Sounded like a ton of bricks and scared the heck out of everybody. I totally seized. My body was contorting and turning purple. My sisters, luckily, were two nurses, and both my sisters are nurses, and they were, one of them was helping, one of them was coaching the other one on how to deal with me at this time, and they were helping so that I didn't, bite a hole through my tongue again, which I don't think I did. I did it, and I bit it like halfway this time. I didn't bite it right through. But during that, all I remember is waking up. Paramedics are there, same situation, asking me who president is, what's my name, and I'm all confused, just like the other time. But I remember I thought I was still in South Carolina, we were in Utah, and they asked me where I was, and I said I'm at my sister's house in South Carolina, and they were like, "No, you're in Utah." So I was totally confused. I remember that. Afterwards, it's very odd having a seizure. So then they brought me into hospital, and they gave me a brain scan again and everything. And I remember the doctor saying, all you have to do is stop drinking and you won't have this problem anymore. And I mean, that kind of hit me. And I started realizing, every time I wean off of, got down to the seizure, they would give me the benzos, they would help wean me off. So, you'd think I would stop drinking, but I didn't stop drinking. I tried to quit and slow down a little bit. I think in January I was trying to experiment a little bit with smoking THC and not drinking, but I still was drinking. So I went back to drinking, and then it was like the end of January, and I heard about my friend who just passed away. He just died from an alcohol complications. He drank himself to death, and I was sort of grieving that and dealing with that. At the time, I was basically living in a mini storage in Asheville, kind of going back, and I wasn't living with my girlfriend at the time, so I was in between, and I was in this main story, trying to figure things out, everything in my life. I had just lost the other job, so I was in a real depressed state again, and I was drinking, and I remember I had to go get there was a recall on my vehicle, so I was bringing it into the shop. When I brought it into Mercedes-Benz place in Asheville, then I brought it in there to check on the recall, and I was driving back, and I took a right-hand turn by the airport, and apparently my blinker was out, and the cop pulled me over, and he had smelled alcohol in the vehicle, and he asked me if I'd been drinking. Apparently I said I was drinking, and they actually arrested me for DUI. Well, then when I went, they brought me into the jail, into the court, to the county jail there. And they had me, strapped, chained, handcuffed, and then they handcuffed me down to a bench. They had me like 2 sets of handcuffs on me. And I remember just basically operating out of panic and fear, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get a second DUI, as if that was the worst thing that could happen. And I was just being very belligerent, not very cooperative with the officers at all. And I ended up yanking on the handcuffs, and I ended up breaking free the one that was strapped to the bench. So I stood up and started walking towards the door, and they ended up, I had 6 cops on me within a second, and they attacked me and thought me with a gun, and they shot me into a chair where you shot lounging your feet in. They kept me in there for hours. I think that happened at 9, and I didn't get out of that chair until 3 in the morning. They were just, they were, voting and telling me, oh, wow, you came in for DUI. Now you got a felony. Then they were trying to get a picture for my mom shot. I said, I don't want a picture taken. I could put my hand in front of the camera, and then I finally flipped the camera off. And that pissed off the officer so bad that he jumped over the camera, attacked me under the ground. A bunch of other cops jumped on top of me in a pig pile. I remember they were bending my wrist back to the point where I was just yelling in pain. And the officer that tackled me said that I bit him, which I don't remember that at all. But he said I bit him, and they were saying, well, you came in for a felony, now you got 2. You came in for DUI, now you got 2 felonies. They charged me with 2 felonies, 1 for assaulting an officer, 1 for escaping, and then a DUI. And then they put me in jail. Now I was in jail for 17 days. They put me in the worst cell block that they possibly could, because they were all pissed at me because because they said I assaulted an officer. But I was in 23 hours in my cell, and I couldn't come out but 1 hour a day. So I remember during that time I was trying to get a lawyer, and I was talking to my mom, and she had told me, she's like, well, or I was saying, my life is over. I remember her saying, no, Justin's life is over. That was the friend that just died of alcohol. And I said, yeah, but my life is over, because when I heard the sentence for what I was charged for, it carried 4 years of prison time. I think when I heard that, I was the most scared I've ever been in my life. But I told my mom, I said, I need a lawyer. I said, you need to get me a lawyer. So I ended up getting a lawyer. My dad retained a lawyer, and he bailed me out after 17 days in jail, and we got good lull. And then on the way back from the jail, my dad said, Josh, you've been an alcoholic. I've noticed you've been an alcoholic for many years. You got a problem with alcohol. Said, I remember back years ago we'd have a drink together, and, I'd be like halfway done my beer, and you'd be like on your third or fourth beer. He's like, this was years ago. He's like, I want you to take the opportunity to go to Florida, go to rehab, but I want you to do that on your own. Make the choice for yourself if you would like to do that, to go to rehab in Florida. And I'll pay for your, I'll make sure you're back, fly back and forth from court for court. And then I said, yeah, well, let me think about it. And so I thought about it for a day, and I decided, yes, I'll take the opportunity to go to rehab in Florida. So I was on a flight, I think, the next day. And I came down to Florida. After I had this stuff, you'd think, like, my alcohol, like I would never, that I would be done with alcohol. But the truth of the matter is I didn't really have an awakening until I was down here in Florida about alcohol. Like, I was actually blessed with being able to go to a rehab where I had a bunch of drunks and alcoholics and drug addicts and a lot of smart counselors. That it was basically a sober college for me. I got the knowledge, some of the knowledge that I needed to learn to be free, just to learn about addiction. I learned about addiction there. But it was probably a couple weeks in, and when I had a real awakening. I remember I went to sleep, and I had a dream. And in my dream, it was like my life flashed before my eyes. And I came to a realization, or I saw just how much pain and suffering alcohol has caused me in my life and my family and the ones that I love. How much pain and suffering it actually has caused, and how much life it's stolen from me. And I remember I woke up in the middle of the night about 3 a.m. and I looked in the mirror, and I looked at myself, and like I just had some sort of a very different awakening. But I had said, Joshua, you never have to drink again. And after that, there was a psychological change that took place that all I can say was a miracle, because something changed inside of me, something flipped, something clicked, and I realized that I don't have to be a slave to alcohol anymore. And to the point where physically it changed. I mean, after that I could go walk by a bar and smell the alcohol or the beer or whatever. Whereas before, I would love the smell of beer, and it smelled gross to me. It smelled when I was like a little kid. And then, like, when I went to, the grocery store or something, and I could walk down the wine aisle and the beer aisle, liquor aisle, whatever, like I was totally indifferent to it. Like something changed in me. The obsession was absolutely lifted at that point. Well, I continued into this TVT program or my rehab. And for the rest of the time, it was about relapse prevention, and there was a lot of good education that I was learning about addiction and how you cope with alcoholism and stuff. So I started, like, putting in my mind that I wanted to make this a concrete lifestyle change, like forever. Like I wanted to crystallize in my mind. So, I took the rehab, the tips and suggestions and the knowledge that I was getting through that rehab, and I took it to heart, and I began to implement it. And like I started doing a lot too through this, like using coping skills. Like I do a lot of meditation, I do a lot of yoga, I do a lot of running. I got learned to take some of my addictions and redirect them into positive things in my life. And I've learned how to cope with my life sober, to go about, because prior to having this knowledge about how to deal with alcoholism, I would numb myself with alcohol. I'd never dealt with anything. I didn't deal with the difficulties of life, and now I'm going through life without Novocaine, and it's it's a blessing because I'm actually, for the first time, growing in areas that I never grew before. Like, in one sense, I was stunted. My growth emotionally and stuff was stunted because I had just used alcohol to numb myself. So now I'm looking at it and I'm realizing I'm able to actually grow as a human being, as an individual, in areas that I never really did grow. Right. So, all this has been going on. I started going through the change within TBT. And then what happens is I start taking one step forward and another step forward and just keep doing the next right thing. And my life started getting better. Like, my relationship with my dad is better than it's ever been. This whole thing has literally healed the relationship with my dad. And through this time, I went through 3 months of this TBT, and then I went and I've continued to go to the AA. I've continued to do my, basically the kind of they laid the groundwork for me in my new life of sobriety there. And I've just basically been practicing it religiously, every day, and using my coping skills, like, for example, the yoga and the running and the schedule. Like, my schedule and my routine is literally like my salvation. Like, that literally keeps me sane. It keeps me sober, keeps me healthy, keeps me growing. So I do this, and I've been doing this for a year now. But throughout this whole year, I've been going back and forth to North Carolina and going to court. And my lawyer's been working this case, and I haven't known, he's been pushing the case and continuing it because they were still pissed at me, and they still wanted their pound of flesh. They wanted me in prison. We had judges that I saw, guys that went through the same thing that I went through for years of sobriety, and I saw the judge lock them up. So I walked through this whole year, this whole summer, just terrified every month about going to jail. Because I'd have to go back, but my lawyer kept getting it pushed off. But in the same sense, I've also, been more grateful than I've ever been because I didn't know if I was going to be in jail the next month. So I literally have been just sucking it up, like living, just, go and watch the sunrise in the morning and just taking in the beauty and just literally being very grateful for every moment. That's how I've been living this whole summer. And then the craziest thing happened is when I went up, I knew this time that I went up in January that this was going to be it. I didn't think you can get me another continuance. I thought either I'm going to go to jail or something's going to happen. And by a miracle, the attorney, we got a good judge, and the attorney got all my charges dropped down to a misdemeanor. To misdemeanor charges with unsupervised probation and everything, which is essentially nothing if I'm living in Florida. So it's just an absolute miracle. And now I'm back here in Palm Beach. And I could say, my sober journey is literally just starting. So thank you all for listening to my story.